and welcome to Gamers Table, a podcast discussion of tabletop role-playing games, war games, movies, books, and various other game-related topics. Be warned, this show contains some explicit material that may not be suitable for all audiences.
Hello and welcome to Gamers Table. My name is Eric.
This is Mike.
This is Dan.
This is Greg.
This is Mark.
This is Jason.
And I'm Sean.
This episode we're going to talk about books.
Actual proper books, not your...
Proper books.
Novels.
Not novels. Oh, well, you can talk... It's novels. We can talk about, nonfiction books.
Cookbooks.
Things like that have gaming implications or inspirations. Now, just kind of put this into perspective. Way back when, episode 8, we talked about inspiration. But we really didn't talk about books. We talked about some movies that we liked and things like that, character concepts.
There's a notation on our culture.
Yes. And also, that was also the infamous For Loko episode.
Yes,
so
That's why you don't remember.
Jason is stone sober this time, so...
yeah, so we should have some really good input. Let's start this off. What book or books are you reading right now, and how do they apply to gaming?
Well, Monday night, I made a character based on Jason Bourne, because I've been listening to the Bourne books on Audible. There's that.
Is that really reading?
Well,
No.
I was that was actually something I was going to bring up is audiobooks, because I've actually recently found audiobooks too, and
Yeah, well, Eric got me onto the audiobooks. It's his fault.
I don't think I've ever done that.
it's a different kind of you got to be in the mindset to listen to it, because you can't really listen to an audiobook and then do something else. You almost have
It's not
I
good
can.
background
It's a
noise.
good road trip.
exactly. It's what I use.
Man.
Yeah, it's
Dan
good.
Brown.
Last year, when I was driving myself to and from Gen Con, I had one of the Wheel of Time books to listen to.
Yeah, okay, so
Okay, you asked what are we reading? I'll get that one out of the way.
Okay.
It has zero gaming implications because we never hardly ever play hard sci-fi. But I'm reading the first book of a trilogy called the Void Trilogy by a guy named Peter F. Hamilton. It's called Pandora's Star.
Is he the one that does like their very militaristic?
I haven't got that far into it yet. I think what you're actually thinking of is probably David
Weber.
David Weber.
Yeah.
I think is what you're talking about.
That's some serious sci-fi.
This is really hardcore stuff, and it's almost brevity is really big with me. And this guy is not brief at all. Like he'll spend entire chapters describing things. Like the last chapter I read, and it was cool, granted, but not for as long as it was. But he was talking about how there's this super wealthy guy, and his house, quote unquote, is a hollowed out asteroid.
Interesting.
And it's just this massive thing. But like, it kind of goes
What was
on
this
and
called
on.
again?
It's called Pandora's Star by Peter F. Hamilton. He's a very nice.
I'll just get this out of the way. One of my guilty pleasures is reading Star Wars novels.
Used to be a guilty pleasure of mine until they started to suck.
Yeah, well, and I found that anything that has the characters from the second trilogy, Han, Leia, all that, no interest. I have no interest in any of it.
You know how that story ends.
Well, yeah, and lately I've been reading like the old. There's a whole run of Old Republic books that are out.
I read a few of those, and those are good.
Yeah.
It's usually ones Eric has recommended to me.
There's a couple of other sci-fi books that I wanted to bring up. One's called Hellhole. It's written by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. They're
I've had it with Kevin J. Anderson.
well, and it's
I thought he was going to say, I've had it with Kevin James. Like, me too. Screw that guy.
it's their attempt to kind of break away from the whole Dune books that they've been doing. If it was written by someone else, I would probably go, well, this is a really good book. But it's about a planet that has been blasted by environmental things, and it's Dune, but it's a decent read. And then another one that I read that I don't know if anybody else has ever heard of is called The Outback Stars by
It sounds like a Australian.
It is. It's an Australian-centric space sci-fi story.
It sounded like an Australian country band.
Yeah.
I'd listen to that.
Sandra McDonald is the name of the author, and it's centered around these teleportals throughout space, and has a lot of
Stargate?
sort of like Stargate, but a very Australian bent to it.
Yeah, that's what we want to do is turn the Stargates over to the Australians.
Why the hell not? I think that sounds like a wonderful
They
idea.
probably handle it better than the Americans and the Ruskies did in the show. Started all kinds of problems.
What are you reading right now, Mike?
I'm currently reading Dance of Dragons, George
Cool.
R.R. Martin.
Never heard of him.
That would fall in the medieval fantasy category.
I can't believe he waited until Christmas to start reading it. He waited till someone gave it to him. If I'd have known
Dance of
up there.
Dragons?
Yeah, if I didn't,
still haven't read it.
if I'd have known,
Well, I just started the
Read it.
series.
Can I borrow my copy?
No, I own a copy. I just haven't read it yet.
I own an autographed copy. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rich.
So naturally, I can't talk much about it for spoilers, but it's
But I
definitely
can.
good.
No, I'm just kidding.
It's
you will
definitely
be
good
punched in
for
the
game
face.
inspiration.
What's that, Greg?
And I said, and you will be punched in the face. Right now, I'm reading. I just finished Deliverance Lost, the 18th book in the Horus Heresy series,
Yeah.
and
So not just Deliverance then.
I was going to bring that up. Yes.
and I just started the Word Bearers Omnibus, which came out last Tuesday. I'm about 30 pages into it.
Those are both Warhammer 40,000 based fiction.
Based on the origin of the
The entire thing, basically. Yeah.
Space Marines.
Yeah.
And
See, now that brings me to one of the points I was going to make, the gateway drug that is Dan Abnett.
yes,
Dan Abnett, Craps Excellence.
I recommended Ravener, a series that he wrote,
Yes.
to a guy that I used to work with who had never heard of Warhammer, had no interest in miniatures gaming at all.
Right.
He read the Ravener trilogy like in a weekend, and after that, he just devoured everything 40K because Dan Abnett
and he's
is
never
that
played
good.
the game before.
Never.
I have a similar story. A friend of mine came down on orders to Korea. I gave him The Founding, the first 3 Gaunt's Ghosts
Yeah.
books in an omnibus. And since then, he has bought every Dan Abnett book that he can get his hands on and read them.
That guy can write.
He's very prolific.
He's good at battles.
Yeah,
and he's good at characters.
Well, his characters are very strong, and he also balances the action with the actual storytelling, which is nice. Which is not the case for a lot of those 40K books.
We'll call it, I think, pulp books in general.
Yeah, I originally read
Eisenhorn
first.
I did Eisenhorn first.
He's damn good. If that's probably one of the George Martin, I think, would be my number one recommend for people who've never read.
Yeah, but
that.
everybody's heard of George Martin.
Yeah,
People-
but
people
I
don't-
think number two, Dan Abnett, would be my number two, because talk about George Martin. I mean, I read the first Song of Ice and Fire book. When I started it, I didn't stop until noon the next day,
Yeah, that's the way it was for me.
and I had to call in sick to work because I stayed up all night reading. Dan Abnett's never done that to me, but it's definitely something that I would recommend, even if you're not a 40K fan or don't even really know what 40K is all about.
See, I do play 40K, and I know a lot about it, and I read a lot of the Dan Abnett stuff, and I got fatigued from reading Dan Abnett, and I had to stop because I was actually starting to hate it.
Really?
because you get invested in people that you know are going to die.
No,
Oh.
no, I mean, I was literally just tired of reading
Oh.
about the 40K universe. No, it was everything you were.
So that's just all the stuff that I gave you.
Yeah,
Okay.
just that stuff.
I feel the same way about many things. I don't read consistently the same genre. I have to
Right.
split things up.
That's why I got really tired of fantasy. Mark I think agrees with me on this
Oh,
one.
yeah.
I haven't read anything fantasy in years.
No.
I just got so bored with it. That's why I'm also not current on Game of Thrones.
That's how I got into spy novels. When I had my other surgery a couple of years ago, I knew I was going to be laying on my face with nothing to do but read and chain smoke. So I had I went out.
Priority straight.
Yeah, let's read and chain smoke.
Yeah, and take Vicodin. Before my surgery, I went and I bought the first 4 Ian Fleming James Bond novels.
That is something I'd like to try sometime. I really love every James Bond movie, every actor, but I've never read a book.
The Bond movies, particularly the Sean Connery ones, which are far and away the best ones, are practically science fiction compared to what's going on in the books. I mean, the books are really just about Bond being awesome on his own, not having all kinds of crazy gadgets.
Well, Eric, you mentioned earlier that you can't read Star Wars books that involve like Luke
Certain
and Leia and
characters,
Han.
yeah.
I'm just the opposite.
The classic story.
Well, I got to a point where, I mean, I love reading. I especially like reading about Han Solo. Fancy that.
And
you know,
fondling yourself at the same time.
Sure, Greg. In your fantasy, if that's what you think I do,
That
that's
is not
fine.
a visual I need.
But anyway,
Who's scruffy looking?
And a vision you'll never get out of your head.
That's right.
Are you one of those guys that writes fanfic about
No.
Han Solo stroking his Wookiee?
no.
Yeah.
But like the Han Solo trilogy was one of my favorite books.
Yeah.
But I got to a point where I just couldn't read that stuff anymore. And I think the last thing I read was I can't even remember what the name of the book was, but it was after the
After
Battle of
Jedi.
It was after Battle of Endor, and it's just after a while it just kind of wears on you.
There's just so much that these particular people can do.
Right.
And, you need something a
Yeah.
little bit different.
But as far as inspiration goes, I think what got my juices flowing for running aces and eights was reading some Elmore Leonard short stories. Back in the 50s, he used to write a lot of pulpy type Western short stories.
Get Shorty.
Yeah, he also wrote.
I've been meaning to read his stuff.
He wrote the short story that inspired 310 to Yuma, which was a pretty good flick, I thought. He's written a lot of stories that are all set in the Southwest, lots of Apaches and
Right.
that kind of thing, and that really got me going to want to run that kind of a game. And
To answer my own question, what am I currently reading? What's on my nightstand right now is the Star Wars Old Republic book, Fatal Alliance, which doesn't have any base characters at all, at least that I've come across.
Is that the MMO tie-in book?
Yeah, they did like three books so far.
Leading up to the
release. It's okay. It's pretty good. It's done by a guy named Sean Williams. I've got I'm a Conan file, if that's even a word. But
you just invented it.
Okay, I'm a Conan file.
From way back.
Yeah.
And not Conan O'Brien, Conan the Barbarian.
Well, him too.
Yeah. So
He's all right.
I've started a collection of the old Tor Conan novels dating
The
back
old
to
ones
like-
with the Vallejo covers,
Yeah,
or Vallejo-esque.
and they
Frazetta.
ran
Frazetta, sorry.
covers. Yeah, they ran from I don't know, it was late '60s all the way up until like '94, and I've slowly started I'm trying to get all of them because on Wednesdays we're doing a High Seas campaign. I decided to start reading Conan and the Crimson Brotherhood, which is a pirate
Nice.
thing. And then, of course, the book that stays on my shelf that I read maybe once every few months is The Tao of Jeet Kune Do. I've had that on my shelf for a long time, just sitting there. Every once in a while, I'll pick it up and read it.
I've got that. I think Greg's got it as well.
Yeah, I've read it about a half dozen times.
I think the book I mentioned earlier about Darth Vader is called Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader.
Yes.
And the book that I'm reading right now that I just started last night is Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor by Matthew Stover. So
Is that an old story?
no, this is
Newer?
this is after Return of the Jedi, and
okay.
he's 24 years old, and he's a general in the New Republic Army, and that's extended universe stuff. I know that we're not supposed to talk about. Dan, sorry.
Hey, man, everybody's got their own thing. I just don't get it.
My thing with the Star Wars book is I could read the stuff with Han and Leia and Luke and all whatnot up until R.A. Salvatore did what he did.
Yeah,
and
but that was very early on.
Is it
it was just terrible.
is it only
and everything
bad?
after that was terrible.
Is it only bad because he killed Chewbacca?
Spoilers.
Oh shit! I'm sorry.
Mark
That was just the.
And that was Vector Prime by...
Mark doesn't argue with logic. He argues with heart.
Well, I mean, I like Chewbacca
Like,
too. and-
I read the book. I didn't appreciate his so-called writing style. I thought the story was lame, and then he drops a moon on Chewbacca just because.
I'm telling you, that had to be by committee. You can't cool Chewbacca by yourself.
well, I think he was given permission to kill a character.
Yeah, and I remember reading an article where he had said that it's like just to prove that nobody was safe.
Nobody is safe. It's got a point.
I think you brought up a good thing, Eric. What books you can read over and over again.
Yeah.
Books, you brought the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. Personally, I'll read Neuromancer every 4 or 5 months, and lately it's been the Brent Weeks series, Night Angel Trilogy. I've probably read that 4 times in the last year or so.
Yeah. These are things that you should be reading, Dan.
Sure.
They are
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Well, okay, speaking of stuff that you should be reading, because this is all really traditional stuff that you guys are talking about. I mean, these are your go-tos. I'm not really hearing anything.
Really, Elmore Leonard Western stories?
Okay, no, I'll give you that. I lent Mike a book, an old-timey book called Lord of Light
I was
by
actually gonna
Roger
mention that.
Zalansky. My favorite book that you can just read over and over and over and over again.
It was written in the 60s, I believe.
Yes, the mid-'60s, yes.
Well, if you want to talk about old sci-fi,
No, I don't want to talk about old sci-fi. I'm just saying that's a book that you can read over and over.
And
and over
I think that
again.
was the book I read after I got sick of the 40K books. It was kind of refreshing going back to the pulpy era.
40K books are pulp, Mike. I hate to break
No,
this to you.
no. I mean, there was a difference between 60s writing and today.
I'll give you that.
They really liked the heavy sci-fi back then.
There's not a lot of heavy... I mean, you just taking the Dune series, you look at the original Frank Herbert stuff, and you try and compare it to the things that his son is writing. Not even close.
The stuff that Kevin J. Anderson is writing and slapping dude's name next to it.
Yes. Brian Herbert's calling in, I think we should do this.
Kev's like, whatever.
Whatever, man.
I already got
The
this
book's
wrote.
done.
There was a couple others that for inspiration for different games, like L5R. There's a writer, Leon Hearn, does a series called The Tales of the Otori. Fantastic.
Did you loan me those?
I think I may have crossed the Nightingale floor with
Yeah.
the first one.
I haven't read those yet.
Fantastic.
For L5R, I tend to read the Hagakure, and I tend to read Musashi if I know I'm going to be playing little L5R.
There's an author called I.J. Parker who the first book is called The Dragon Scroll. It's about a character, Akitada. He's an investigator. I swear reading these books, I.J. Parker must play L5R because that's exactly the way every adventure I've ever seen from L5R. It's a novelization, it seems like. But it has no connection to L5R, but they're really good too. A lot of investigations and things like that.
There's